thanks to everyone who is joining us today for our annual conference. My name's Jim Hemphill. I'm a lawyer with the Graves, Doherty, Heron, and Moody firm here in Austin, where I have a trial and appellate practice focusing on First Amendment and government transparency law. And we've got an excellent panel today, and let's do some quick introductions, and then we'll get started. Starting on my immediate left, Representative Todd Hunter from Corpus Christi. He represents District 32 in the Texas House of Representatives. He's a longtime supporter of open government and free press. He's long been a friend of the FOIFT. More importantly, he's a friend of the public's right to know about its government, having sponsored and advocated many bills promoting government transparency. Missy Carey is a member of the FOIFT Board of Directors and is retired from the Attorney General's office, where she held many positions, including Chief of the Open Records Division and Chief of Staff, and she has years of experience dealing with the Public Information Act and a wealth of knowledge about open government issues. Thanks for joining us, Missy. Josh Hinkle is a working journalist who's Director of Investigations and Innovations at KXAN-TV in Austin. He heads the station's investigations team, and he covers politics and has done many stories using material obtained through the Public Information Act, and he can tell us about some of those today. And then we have Rob Henneke, the Executive Director and General Counsel of the Texas Public Policy Foundation. He and TPPF have worked with FOIFT and the Sunshine Coalition the past 3 sessions to pass transparency bills, and we're very pleased to have Rob and the Public Policy Foundation as allies promoting government transparency and accountability. So thanks, y'all, for joining us. I'd like to start looking at some big picture issues. We could talk with Representative Hunter for a minute. What we saw last session, the appetite right now for improving the Public Information Act, and what transparency advocates can do during this interim to help our cause at the Capitol. Representative Hunter?
Well, we need to help the legislature know that transparency isn't what the individual thinks it should be. And what I mean by that is transparency is transparency. It doesn't matter what it is. I think the problem is not a negative on the legislature, it's educating. If you look at your legislative process now, a lot of us are not the senior members anymore. You have had a lot of movement. We've lost a lot of our legislators, as Donis knows and Laura and Oscar know, to other positions, and so it's part of us to educate and explain the meaning of open government. And I'm going to tell you, not everybody understands the process. They don't know about going through the process when you have to go through certain of the other offices. So you have a legislature, don't be bashful to explain the importance to you. The other thing is we need to hear from you. If I don't hear from a broadcaster, a newspaper, then I don't know if we're really promoting anything. And just take it from somebody who's been up there a while and gone through these issues. We can succeed. We have the TPPF down here. They've been very good at being very consistent and common sense, I think, on openness in government. And we've got to keep that going. You got to keep it going. And I tease about it because everybody wants to interpret it their way. It's real simple. If you're for transparency, you're for transparency. If it's public dollars, why aren't we producing the information? The process isn't supposed to be an obstacle course. I mean, my gosh, the process is to provide the public with information. And so that philosophy is something that I use, and I try to educate my fellow legislators. And I don't think that it's a negative. I think we've got to educate the process. I will tell you, there's a lot of them that don't know and haven't been through the process. I know Rachel is here from Channel 6 in Corpus Christi, and she's been a great friend and advocate on this issue. We have a lot of transportation issues. Well, what's wrong with telling the public what's going on? They paid for it. I mean, the last thing we need to do is not provide the information. When you do that, then everybody thinks there's a conspiracy. They question. Bringing integrity to the process is producing the information. And I always get, as you know, that there's a lawyer side to it. And there's sometimes legitimate legal, I get it. But let's never forget the basis. The basis, openness, providing information to the public, the media, the press, the broadcasters, the papers. You can do that, and you're just doing public information. But really where I need the help is just be with me so I can be there explaining, what we're doing. And when I say Sunshine Week, they think it's another 107-degree day. I need to make sure I got you in there helping me explain that we're really going to light up the very good information that needs to go to the public. So that's kind of a 30,000 foot, but it's a positive one. I don't see the barriers. I just sit and see the explanation and education. So never give up, because we will achieve, and we've been making some pretty good progress and getting some new folks.
Thank you, Representative Hunter. You mentioned the idea of how the how the Public Information Act shouldn't be an obstacle course. And I think a lot of us who deal with it look at some of the fundamental concepts in the Public Information Act. One of them, of course, is openness, but also receiving information promptly, particularly those in the news media. Getting the information quickly is of great interest, and it's built into, at least it's supposed to be built into the Public Information Act, that information is supposed to be produced promptly, and some of us who deal frequently with requests under the Public Information Act find that it's not being done promptly. Missy, is there something we can do about response time issues?
Yeah, thank you for having me today, and I appreciate being able to talk to you guys. One of my favorite things to do with FOFT is I'm one of the hotline attorneys. So for about a week, almost every month, I answer the phone from whoever calls and listen to their stories and try to help them navigate some of the minefields. And what I wanted to mention is I am concerned because an ongoing sort of theme, I think, since COVID has been a lack of promptness in response. And I think there's a lot of reasons for it. Some of them, some small percentage are legitimate. A lot of them are obstacles that seem to be thrown up to requesters, and they're not able to get information promptly. There's use of the process as a weapon as opposed to using the process as it was intended to withhold things that are confidential or discretionary exceptions. There's a use of invoicing improperly just to try to keep people at bay. And I have a lot of concerns about that. And I think it's an area in which we really need to work on is this promptness issue. And so I'm concerned about it. I think one of the great things about this conference is y'all's ideas are really valuable in that area. And I'd like to hear some of those ideas. But I do think that as you look at the workload of the Open Records Division, which I was in charge of for a long time, it keeps going up and up and up and up. And there are some new governmental bodies, but there are not that many new governmental bodies, Jim. So it's like, how is it possible that the requests for briefing keep skyrocketing and really putting a lot of burden on the staff at the Attorney General's office when there's not that many new governmental bodies? And you could do the math and do the statistics, but so it's like people are using the process. And we need to get that out to the legislature so they understand and see if there's something that can be done about the process early on to keep that from happening.
Have you seen any kind of shift in attitude amongst governmental bodies, moving from a presumption of openness to a presumption of we're going to try to withhold this and ask for an Attorney General's opinion? I know the number of AG opinions is just skyrocketed in the past few years.
Yeah, I mean, I can't prove that, but that's what it tells me. What it tells me is that without concrete proof and pulling the statistics that they have at the Attorney General's office, I think it shows there must be. And if you take the callers, the unofficial data of the callers to the hotline, they are encountering this briefing, even when they write a really good request. And sometimes on the hotline we help people, I do at least, phrase their requests, and they're asking for public information, and yet it's resulting in a ruling. And I think that's really problematic, these interpretational. And where do you go when they don't interpret your request the same way? They intentionally interpret the request to be broader than you've said it, and go on and do that, belt and suspenders of sending in a ruling, and you get no information, and they're hoping you go away. And so I think that that's a real big concern. I think I'm seeing that more and more. And I don't know why, but it's not a good trend, and it's something we've got to educate and get back a hold on, this presumption of openness that makes Texas unique from other states and other countries. And if we don't protect that, it's presumed open unless it's not, then we backslide into a presumptively closed environment. And that wasn't the way this Texas statute was intended. We're not intended to be presumptively closed. We're supposed to be presumptively open, and we are backsliding, in my opinion. It's my opinion. But I think we're backsliding, and I think we need to work on ways to make sure we bring it back around.
Thanks, Missy. Josh, as a working journalist, I'm sure you've got some stories about both successes and obstacles that you've seen in working with the Public Information Act. Anything that you'd like to share?
Sure. I think that one of the biggest challenges for journalists is trying to navigate something that can be very difficult for just the everyday person to understand. And when we talk about the Public Information Act, it's easy for me to get riled up because I'm that angry journalist about things that don't go my way with it when I want something. But it's really the people that the act impacts that matter, because that's who we're working for as journalists, to tell their stories. And we could not get progress as journalists on making this act better without the help of the people that have gone through some of the worst stories of their lives. And I just really, really, really want to thank two people in the audience right now, Robert and Kathy Dyer. They lost their son who died in police custody a number of years ago, and they have been at the Capitol session after session after session after session. That is 4 sessions in a row trying to get the Public Information Act fixed, because there is something called, by many people, the dead suspect loophole. Basically, when someone dies in police custody, police had the discretion to withhold information in that case. And it was a loophole because it was initially meant to protect the privacy of people that didn't go through the court process. And if you die in police custody, you're never going to go through the court process. So is that really fair to withhold information from the public, from journalists, from lawyers, and especially from families? Robert and Kathy, thank you so much for the advocacy work you did at the Capitol, because you have helped so many people around the state that are going to be facing this issue in the future. You'll get to hear from them in a session a little later in the day also. So besides that, I think that it just shows that there's still work that needs to be done. Even though this loophole was closed, there are still facets of it that could be used against public information requests that still may need to be fixed. And even the author of that bill, Representative Joe Moody, has seen how it has been used as a political tool, especially in this last session, to hold up other pieces of legislation, to really just kind of get at other things that lawmakers are working at. And it shouldn't be that way. This should be an easy answer. We should make this information public because that's what everyone wants. They want answers in some of these awful, awful circumstances. And we are where we are now, but there's always the possibility that this loophole, even though it's closed, could be challenged by the people that have consistently challenged it over the years. So I think I'm just paying very close attention to see, as there are additional deaths in custody now that it's closed, and people start requesting information into those, how are law enforcement agencies going to be behaving, and how are they going to be reacting? Will they push back, and do we need to come back and revisit the legislation again?
I'd like to jump in and ask Representative Hunter if he agrees that having citizens come to committee hearings and having journalists report on these things help during the legislative session, and what your view of that is.
The answer is yes. I sit on state affairs. I believe, as you know, we I've been on both criminal jurisprudence and state affairs, and I think we voted on your bill several times and did it out of committee. It does help. Sometimes I'm in that chair. You know, I want you to know, you come to a committee hearing, and I know what a lot of you are saying. You're going to say, nobody's paying attention. I changed my view to sit there and listen. If you come to my committee hearing, I have sometimes been in the chair 12 hours. I have more committee members worried about me having a catheter than anything else. But I heard from public, and it's a great question, they want to make sure you're paying attention. And I'm not giving you feedback on others because I'll only do it on myself. But I'm going to sit there and I'm going to listen. I'm going to have time limits because in some committees you have to or you'll never finish. But you being there does matter. One, it shows you care. If you're not there, it's easy to say nobody showed up. And I'm not going to say that maybe some committee hearings started at a strange time and that you can't get there. I understand that. But yes, you being there, you having an impact, you engaging, you humanize the law. And so from somebody who sits in there, yes, and I encourage the media, all press, all citizens, all individuals, you come. I don't care if we have 200 people in there. It's important because when you're engaged in the process, it helps me move transparency more because they see you. They see the impact. But if you come to a committee hearing and there are 2 people sitting out there, it's sometimes hard to explain to others, no, people care, but just participate. You don't have to talk. You can sign the registration. You can listen to the folks that advocate. But let me tell you, yes, the retail politics system still works. Citizen participation still works. It has an impact, and you know, we're still human beings. We haven't all turned into AI yet, is what I can tell you. But yes, citizen participation does work, and I encourage it all the time.
But how can we make that participation more streamlined so people like the Dyers don't have to come back session after session after session? That's something they're having to relive.
Now, and I understand it, and I can only talk from my standpoint, but you just don't give up. As many of the people here know, I'm a coastal guy. I work on most of the coastal issues. It takes me sometimes 6 years to get a bill passed, and sometimes 8 years. Don't give up. I can't guarantee you what's going to happen, you know, in the process, but don't give up. My view is the more they see, the more they hear. You're educating every time. We can only improve, but some do. Some do. They say it's too much time. Don't give up. I will tell you, yeah, the process, look, when you meet once, allegedly, every 2 years for 140 days, and we've just gone through that trend. Let me tell you something. You all are impacted by special sessions. Most of you weren't born when I started. I've been there when a Christmas tree went up on the House floor. That's when you know you've been there too long. Now, my point to you on this is the system is a little difficult because under the Constitution, we're only there 140 days every 2 years, and most of you know the first 60 days we can't vote. That's the 60-day rule, unless it's an emergency item. So, yes, you do have we'll just say a smaller amount of days, and sometimes we can't get to them. It's not necessarily a negative. We just can't get to them. But don't think of time, think of the effort. Don't give up. Every time you do a story, every time you show up, you're moving the ball. So I always look at the glass half full. At least it's half full, and that's a positive. And then some of us will keep the process going because I want public participation. The best laws come from you. And so I'm going to give you more of a positive, proactive, and just use that step forward. But they're good questions, because when you see the mechanics, you sometimes wonder, are we really moving anything? I will tell you, we can move it. And we've been with you, and you just keep working it, because I know where your belief is. And that applies to everybody. It applies. Poor Laura has worked so hard. She used to have brown hair. It's turned blonde now. And I tell her, just keep in there. You'll end up with a new hairstyle, but it'll be completely. But she's done a great job these years. Donis went the other direction and lost all his. But so don't let the frustration get you.
Yeah,
Don't let it.
I mean, I agree. I think it's hard when when I was on the government side to tell legislators that a piece of legislation is really important and people really care and requesters really care, and there be no requesters there. And they're like, well, if they cared, I don't have one card. I don't have one, even nobody even dropped off a card. Nobody came by the office, even on the off season. And you might think that if you go by the office and check in and leave your name, that nobody notices. But I know you do notice. And so those things are just incredibly important. So if you're at the Capitol on something and something matters to you, try to target some of the members and go by and just, drop a note or a handwritten post-it with the staff. Any of that helps show that somebody besides the governmental bodies is out there engaged, because they will engage the governmental bodies and they're going to hear that side, and they're not going to hear the other side if nobody stops by or comes to the committee meeting or does anything. And so it's really important.
And let me add to that. If, let's say you have an issue, I know Rachel's here from my area, and we have a lot of safety issues that we're trying to get from agencies. Come to me, and I'll try to help you work through the process. I can tell you a little about the committees, who I would focus on, and I can do that on the House side, because that's what our role is. Don't be bashful to do that. And you're correct. I hear from a lot of members, as you've all brought up, oh, nobody came or nobody left a note. Don't just, out of sight, out of mind. I need you there. I really, really do. On all the transparency issues, the more you're there, the strength of freedom of information comes forward. And so don't let the frustration, bother you. That's just the nature of almost anything we go through. But the goal can be reached. And I know you're not going to give up, and your supporters are not going to give up. And as long as we're moving, you're going to win. And so, but come by my office. It's an open door. I have Jenny here. Jenny's our committee clerk, and she's here to support your efforts on transparency. Go by and visit her. But I want to give you an open door to come talk to us, because if I educate you on the system, you're going to know what to do. And I'm glad to have you. By the way, I'll dress in black even there. So I don't have any change of color up here.
You got a Johnny Cash theme going on?
Well, I walk the line. How does that help?
There it is.
Well, I know that we talk a lot in government transparency circles about improving the Public Information Act. We have made some progress. Obviously this last session with the in-custody deaths loophole being addressed, and we've more recently had the government contracting fix for the what we call the Boeing fix for the Boeing opinion, at least aspirationally making government contracting things more open. But we still have some obstacles. One of the obstacles is that after you go to the Attorney General's office, if you get an adverse ruling, the only avenue left open to you is filing litigation in district court, which can be expensive. And there is an attorney's fee provision in the Public Information Act that under some circumstances a successful litigant can recover attorney's fees, but the scope of that has been narrowed pretty substantially. Rob, I think that y'all have been involved in some of the attorney's fees issues. Have you looked at that, or are there other things in the Public Information Act that your organization is targeting as potential areas for beefing up government transparency?
Well, good morning, and thank you. Thank you for the invitation to be on the panel and to carry forward the last thought. You know, all of these stories, all of these examples provide the body of work to champion for reforms and to do better. And I certainly echo what Chairman Hunter said, and the foundation, we love partnering with him and working with him as well as y'all's organization. Jim, I had two kind of points to make in response to your question. One is, you know, I think we need to audit the exceptions that exist under the Open Records Act and also under some of the interpreting case law to dispel the idea of government having confidential information. You know, conceptually, the who, what, where, why, how of what government does should be public. And we should start there, period, full stop. And there's too many now different categories that government can use then when they want to keep information from you. A quick example, here recently, Highland Park ISD had a situation where the head of the tennis center, the head tennis coach, was stealing money from the school. And they found out about it, and the school district hired an outside audit company to go audit the investigation. But what they did on purpose was that they paid for it, but they had their law firm hire the audit company. And the audit company gave the report to the law firm. The law firm told the school district in executive session, here's what we found. So there is a final report of factual findings paid for by taxpayer money documenting misuse and theft of taxpayer funds. Seems like a basic open record that the public should be able to receive. We're in litigation right now trying to get that, and probably spending, you know, years and, you know, hundreds of thousands of dollars in their attorney's fees to fight something that should just be basic and open and transparent. So the concept of confidentiality for the government is one that I think we need to, you know, reverse that back to the default being that public information belongs to the public. The other thing is it's got to be faster to get to a resolution. I think the men and women at the Attorney General's office, and Missy used to work there, they do great work. There's only so many of them, but it's even the process itself that's just not set up to succeed. You know, you can game the system by asking for an open records request. It's going to take 180 days, and a lot of times that's being done because they know by the time you get the document, it's not newsworthy anymore. It doesn't matter. And so even if it gets put out 6 months later, then it's, okay, so what? But it's really expensive to go to state district court or county court at law and file a civil action against the government, and it's still going to take you a while. What I would like to see next session is a way to come to a lot faster, less expensive way of resolving these basic open records type disputes, where really it's a straightforward question of yes or no, and all you need is somebody to just decide, to look at it and decide, do you get it or not? You know, one idea, Jim, that I've spoken with y'all about is maybe expanding the jurisdiction of JP Court to where for a much less cost, you could just file a simple JP proceeding on a simple factual open records question. Get a hearing in 2 weeks, you show up, government's there, JP looks at the document, says you get it, you don't get it, either side can appeal, but basically you get a quick answer on that from a neutral arbiter of that that can make a decision so you can move on. But you know, right now where it's going to the AG's office, it's taking 180 days, and even after that, there's kind of little enforcement afterwards. We're allowing governmental entities to game the system and to withhold that information knowing the odds are good that you're not going to do anything about it once they seek the initial ORD determination and withhold the information. So, you know, let's flip the terms back to a default presumption of public, and let's find ways to get faster access to the information that doesn't cost a ton of resources to do.
Thanks, Rob. And to follow up on that a little bit, you know, we talk about the presumption of openness, and we talk about, what we can do in the legislature to try to address some of these things. We talk about how things go through the Attorney General's office, and you're right, they do a terrific job, but they're overworked, certainly, and it takes longer than it should in an ideal world. But where the rubber meets the road, at least in my experience, is with the initial request to the governmental body, right? How, if it's possible, how can we work on changing the attitudes of governmental bodies from a presumption that we're going to keep these things secret, like the example you had, and try to get back to what I think the initial impetus was for the Public Information Act, which is to be fast, to be self-executing without having to go through the Attorney General's office and litigation when something's obviously open, and prompt. Is there something that advocates of government transparency and accountability can do to try to change the atmosphere with the governmental bodies that are receiving the requests in the first place?
Well, I think really, I don't think you're going to change the mindset. You just have to limit the wiggle room. And that's where I'm coming back to this, dispelling this idea that government has confidential information. That, if we should get back to some basic categories, a social security number, medical information, personal identifying information that is just straight up categorical. We know you have to redact the social security number. But much broader than that kind of type of information, we need to really audit and examine the categories that allow for those type things. So I think we get better responsiveness when there's just less reasons and less categories of information to be able to withhold. Because a lot of times it's embarrassing to the government. They don't want you to know how much they paid to contract Julio Iglesias to come perform the concert on that. And, other times it's, the transparency. Another quick war story, we fought this case in Georgetown because our client wanted to know the payback analysis for the return on investment for the solar panels the city put on some public buildings. And it took 5 years to litigate that information that he was told by his city council person, hey, just go ask for the payback analysis on that. So we got to get rid of these categories. And if it's not something straightforward like a driver's license number or a social security number or identifying information of a child, then it should be disclosed. And let's start from there and work our way up, as opposed to where we are, where we have all of these exceptions that might apply, and then we're fighting our way to transparency at the end.
And I think that's again, a fundamental premise of the Public Information Act, right, is that information held by the government belongs to the public, and it's not secret. And that should be the presumption. And as a matter of fact, the Public Information Act says in plain language that it is to be interpreted in favor of openness. And I think that interpretation, is meant to apply to governmental bodies as well as to courts. Is that being observed? Is the presumption of openness and the broad interpretation, the statutory command that the interpretation of the Public Information Act be interpreted broadly in favor of openness? Is that something that we've lost or something that's been eroded, or what do you all think? And I'll just open it up to anyone who wants to speak on that issue.
I think there are some really good public agencies out there that do a good job with fulfilling open records, but there are definitely some that the public information officer is really there for defense. They are there to make sure that it's difficult to get these answers. I am not sure why every time, but it's different at every place. But it definitely is not an easy process when you have someone with the mindset that they're protecting the agency rather than giving the public what they deserve.
I mean, I'd like to see more members of the media asking candidates for office their position on this exact question and reporting it. I mean, I think there's a lack of education. I think if you press public officials on their position about this issue, along with all their other positions, it would really go a long way. And then if you reported that, you could hold them to that, and it would set a tone, a leadership tone within their governmental entity, where, you know, if you're the public information officer, and I've been the public information officer, and you could literally go to your council person and say, "Well, you said this, and this is here's where the rubber meets the road. This is that time where you said we were gonna, you know, this you believed in transparency and stuff, so we need to release this, even though you don't like it." And so I think the media has a special way, and bloggers and community activists, to put that thumb on there right then when they want your vote and they need your vote to get to ask them, what is your position? I never see anybody ask anymore, and so I wonder about that, and I think that would be a valuable tool.
And let me jump in. So when we talk open government, it's more than the state. Let's not forget that. I mean, federal, state, local, everybody should be engaged. Everybody should be following this. And yeah, I ask, everybody should tell you whether they're for open government or not. What bothers me, and I agree with how TPPF is trying to go forward on transparency, it's not supposed to be a litigation process. And it's turned into a courtroom process. I mean, you're supposed to say public money, produce. And then we have every legal reason. We have every delay. It's become a delay to exhaust your efforts. That's not the title of the act. And so across the board, I also don't think you should limit it to candidates. I think we should ask organizations. You got a lot of people that you belong to or groups. Everybody does. Are they for open government? Are they for freedom of information? It should be on a lot of agendas. I mean, we all say we're for freedom of information, and then you got caveats. And, you know, I know we can talk about the state agencies, but it's really across the board. And the more we can set the stage and the tone, openness is integrity, openness is security, and openness is freedom and fairness. We got to get back to those themes. And it shouldn't be, as I said earlier, an obstacle course. I mean, we're defeating the purpose of the act when we do that. So back to my area, the more you help me, the more I can educate on what you're saying here, because I can deliver that information. But don't give up on all aspects of government at all levels and organizations. They should all be helping you on this.
There should be a sooner pressure system, I think, because it shouldn't get to the point where we are delaying requests and it's having to go to the Attorney General's office for a ruling, and it is going through the court process. I once waited for a public information to go through that entire process for 4 years from the Department of Public Safety and the Attorney General's office involved with it. It shouldn't get to that point. There is a complaint system with the Attorney General's office. I've filled that thing out many times, never heard one thing back.
And that's what I was saying, though, is that I think we need to look at a way to expedite that and to move it outside of the Attorney General's office. You know, the Attorney General is not a judge, they're not a court, and there's a limitation on, they're being swamped by this on purpose. But, you know, if you've ever dealt with small claims court, if you ever had to deal with, you know, a speeding ticket or an eviction proceeding, you know, we have this existing court system that is already set up in every county, and it's meant to be a very simple process. You know, this is where like landlord-tenant disputes or, you know, that kind of stuff happens. It's not a court that's set up to deal with complicated legal questions, but these are judges that already exist, that exist to be, you know, very simple fact determination type things. And it's also a much less expensive way to litigate. You know, if you're going to file a small claims issue in JP court, you handwrite it out on a single sheet of paper and pay a $100 filing fee, and then in some counties, you can get a hearing in about 2 weeks. So my point is that I agree with what's being said, but I think if we're going to move this in the right direction, part of the accountability is going to be where you can get a faster answer. And if the government entity knows that if I hold this back on some BS reason, but you can have me in front of a JP, a Justice of the Peace, in a week and a half to look at this thing and make a decision, maybe you'd see less of these type of exceptions being applied and just more transparency on the front end. But as long as it can get bogged down in terms of time and resources, it's going to continue to be a game, and you're going to continue to have all levels of government that seek to hide what they're doing from the public because they don't want the public to know. But if you can hit them fast, hit them for an inexpensive amount of money, maybe it's not JPs, maybe it's an administrative court,
Yeah, I was
SOA
gonna say,
or
maybe
something
SOA.
like
I
that.
was
Yeah,
thinking
SOA or
SOA.
that. But something
Prompt.
quick, cheap, and simple, SOA's State Office of Administrative Hearing,
Special SOA judge, maybe.
then you can get that decision in a week to 10 days instead of 180 days to 2 years. And I think that would radically transform the system, because then this game of hiding the ball and running out the clock and draining your resources wouldn't be effective anymore.
I'm so glad you brought up the money factor of that too, because I feel like a lot of this conversation has been about the media and journalists, but I mean, the media doesn't have a lot of money right now either. We're struggling as an industry, so being able to pay for any kind of legal issues like that is going to be difficult for many media outlets. But think about the just everyday person that wants that public information too. They're probably a lot less likely to be able to invest in a costly lawsuit or any type of resource they're having to pay to fight this. So I just think that the cost factor is something that severely needs to be addressed in this conversation.
And I want to add something to what you're all saying. And actually, it's very good ideas on the SOA, and we need to take a look at this. Let me give you a side issue that impacts everything we're saying. And some of you are looking at it and some of you are not. And that's artificial intelligence, AI. And the reason I bring this up is that it's a growing information issue. And as we modify and look at our transparency and open government laws, we need to watch the development of AI. Yes. And that is something we need to really start reviewing. Gio Capriglione, who's state representative, North Texas, who's been a big advocate of these issues of open government, was the one who authored the oversight for Texas. It was a bill that passed out of our committee. And I've been watching it nationwide, worldwide, and one of my concerns is if you use the apps, some of the information is absolutely inaccurate or old. And so I also have been seeing presentations being done by artificial intelligence. And so as we develop open government, there are some of these new technology issues that we need to incorporate and
I
make
agree.
sure we're addressing, because I don't want to give them an exemption. You don't want to forget that. And then all of a sudden you have two pathways. It's just a
Right.
seed to plant to everybody.
Yeah, and I also think there's technology available now in certain governmental entities that they don't use. I mean, for example, global word searches by IT departments that could actually go through everyone's email, and instead the system's slowed down by, I'm going to ask each individual employee to go check, when you could easily put a keyword into a computer, already existing computer search engine, and have that, pull the data for the public information coordinator. But that's not the way the system's set up, and those things slow down response times. And if it's already, I understand not wanting governmental entities to have to spend more money on things like AI and stuff, but there's probably things they already have that they're not even using, that they already own that they're not using. And that's a leadership issue. And again, I think Josh's experience is pretty indicative of a lot of media. If you have leadership that believes in transparency, it'll filter down and it really helps. So you'll see these stark contrasts between who you deal with and how they answer dependent on education and leadership. And so I think even before you get to the court process, you got something way up here of, what are you teaching and how are you getting it across to the governmental entities? And most people the state agencies are the big splash, but most people want to hear about their school board and their city council and about an ordinance that's getting passed. I mean, that's the real meat and potatoes of everyday transparency work, or, the city council meetings, the school boards, the planning and zoning commissions, all that kind of stuff. And they're all equally as important.
And I think that goes to a phrase that Rob used that maybe we should make our mantra, that this is supposed to be quick, cheap, and simple, right? The Public Information Act is supposed to be self-executing. Missy, you mentioned about the global searches. In your time, have you seen, anything that we can do as transparency advocates to help educate leaders of governmental bodies to use those tools?
Well, I mean, I think it's never on their agenda unless someone brings it up to them. I worked for 4 attorneys general, and this was never particularly high on their list when they came into the agency of, well, I really want to be an open government advocate. I mean, that was not on anyone's list, and that requires sitting down and talking about why it's important or not and trying to push that leadership discussion. So that, I'm so pleased to see the students here. I know I think Kelly said we have maybe 25 Kelly students here today or coming today, and this is something that the old people like me can't just keep doing. We got to educate every generation that becomes the workforce, that goes into places, that goes into the media, goes into government, and advocates to leadership of why this is important, why it matters. It's a law like any other law. You can't just say, I pick and choose which laws I want to comply with. That's a dangerous path, and this is an important one. And you got to advocate. You've got to be educated enough to advocate. And so I'm so pleased to see them all here and sort of next genning, this topic. It's an important one.
And we can sit up here and talk about all these issues, for all day. But
All day.
being dedicated to the public's right to know and transparency, at this point, I'd like to open it up to if there's anyone in attendance who'd like to say anything or ask some questions. That'd be great at this point. Donis, did you have something?
Is it time, the 50th anniversary of the FOIFT bylaws, to have some consequences written into the laws, teeth written into the laws, so that a city clerk in a town just says, go ahead, sue me, I'm not going to give it to you, knowing that the reporter or the citizen doesn't have resources to do that? Should there be consequences for someone who just thumbs their nose at a law?
I'll start on that. It's a fair question. I'd rather get the information on the front end than be able to beat up somebody on the back end. And that's where I would come from, conceptually reevaluating and auditing the exceptions that exist out there to get back to the original meaning of the Open Records Act. One example I'd give to you is, let's get rid of this idea that the deliberative process or draft work or attorney work product in a government should be withheld from the public. I mean, if you have a draft and now that draft has changed from the final report, or you have the city attorney's office given a memo to the city council that they're relying upon, or stuff like that, we've just said, that should be withheld back so that they can operate. But if we go to this idea of transparency, if we go to this thing of the who, what, where, why, how should belong to the public, then that stuff shouldn't be withheld there. And so, as I guess the point of me being on the panel here today, if we just get rid of these exceptions and dispute these concepts that exist that permit government to withhold information, then I think we get back to more of a pure vision of what was intended post-Sharpstown when we had these laws in the first place, and that if it happens in government, it's something that we should be able to know and find out about, and that should be the default presumption, and there shouldn't be ways to get around that that even allow them to thumb their nose at the public and try to hide information. So I'd rather fix it on the front end than hammer somebody on the back end, and that's where I think our focus is coming from.
I mean, I've always been kind of money-centric, Donis. I mean, those lawyers are being paid by the tax dollars of the citizens. I mean, whose lawyers are they? Are they the taxpayers' lawyer? Are they citizens' lawyers? Are they somehow get a special status, but be paid by public money, but yet belong to the elected officials? I mean, it's something to really think about, like, follow the money. I mean, who pays for these people? And you would think that it would urge transparency as opposed to being closed, but they forget whose money it is.
There are so many laws passed, not just this one, that we say you have to do this, but then there's no teeth to it. There is no enforcement mechanism. There's no one to enforce that. And that's the big question, is who would enforce that? Because if you're saying the Attorney General's office is the one that needs to do that, I don't think that's the answer. That's a political office, and that could change depending on who's in charge.
The other thing, Donis, look, we got to modernize this act. It needs some teeth. And by the way, you said you're a teenager compared to me. I want you
I'm
to
not
know,
going to say that here, sir. No way.
But look, if nobody thinks anything's going to happen, they're going to keep doing the same deal.
No doubt.
And a lot of times, it's a situation where, hey, there's no consequence.
And it's so discouraging for the good governmental agencies because they sit back and then they get grief from their city council person or their agency head that says, well, so-and-so doesn't do it. And so that's not good. And so, I mean, it discourages the really good governmental entities. They're looking out and saying, well, other people are not having to do this. And it's a lot of work, and, the bosses don't really like it. And, and so it's not good. It's not a good trend.
And so we do need to do something updated. We do. The SOA thing that you all brought up, we need to look at this. It's a concept I hadn't thought of, and that's why we have these conferences. Another bit of advice to help, since you had brought it up. You're all, part of your business are stories, and part of your business is freedom of information. One thing that helps, and it's not that I'm biased, but I am, Rachel from Channel 6. You notice how many times I brought up Corpus Christi? 4 times so far in this speech.
Like a good rep.
She does what helps. I've got this story going on. I got that. But when she has a freedom of information issue, she separates it. And whatever level, as you said, from local to a state to a federal, sometimes they blend in, but sometimes it helps just to know, I have this situation, this is where I need freedom of information to help. And you separate your individual stories you're doing versus the concept of freedom of information. Because I don't want what you said. The media is just in here to get you. The whole point is, let's get our messaging. You got to do your job and I got that. And on freedom of information, let's kind of separate that because I can get more traction to help. And I want to thank her because we have an issue and it involves safety issues, but it's been a great example of where you have a story, but you also have now a need for public policy to go back to the public. And someday I'll give you my speech when we do another panel on ERCOT and PUC. We have a real, but I don't want to take up more hours.
Yeah, I was going to say, that's probably a whole afternoon, ERCOT.
We have a few minutes. I think we had another question back here. And I've been asked to go ahead and repeat these questions because the cameras aren't picking up the audio. So the comment was that there's at least been some talk of certain agencies having blacklists of requesters. Some people get responses, some people don't, and whether there's a comment on whether that's going on. and
I want
how-
to speak up on that because that affects me personally, and I want to say this loud and proud. I see Lauren's out there too. So Lauren, I'm talking to you. As long as I was at the Office of Attorney General, there was no such thing as a blacklist. I would have never tolerated, and I would have quit over something like that. I would have never tolerated the thought of blacklisting any particular person. The law is very clear on requesters. Other people need to be treated each with respect and individually in their requests, and I would have never tolerated such a thing. Now, if that goes on when I wasn't there, that is really unfortunate and is utterly intolerable. And I cannot speak out in strong enough terms on that is not the way that the public should be treated by its government. And I firmly disagree with any such notion of a blacklist of anyone, a reporter, or request, or otherwise that isn't in total compliance with law. Now, we know in the Public Information Act there are certain provisions that allow, and I don't particularly agree with them, but they're what the law says on, vexatious requesters, and you can go through certain processes, and, I understand that. But the thought that the government that belongs to the people and the people get blacklisted is utterly offensive. And I want to put that out in the public. Y'all can quote me on that, and I'm happy to talk about that. And to the extent, Lauren, that happened to you, I want to personally apologize for that because that's intolerable. So,
To add, since I don't want to tell you that I don't know him pretty well. We call him the Starbucks reporter. That's a private joke between him and myself. Good friend, I want to tell you thanks. You've been around a while, and you're an individual that I can say has always had integrity, and you've always been a very good straight shooter. That'll be the last compliment I ever give you. Just kidding. Just kidding. Look. I don't know about the list.
I just can't.
Here's the deal. I'm on so many lists, I lose track. We'll put it that way, okay? I do things I didn't even know I did. So my view is there shouldn't be a list. The act was created for the public. The public is entitled to the information. If you are a constant requester, you're following the law. If you're a constant requester for public information, don't give up. That's your right. But I agree with you. We shouldn't get into lists.
That's ridiculous.
We shouldn't get into menus. We should go back and always be the base, and that is freedom of information means openness to all. And that's what we've got to do. And some of us will do and try to promote that.
And I think that's what we're talking about here is, and let's separate the difference between, certain reporters that an elected official may or may not choose to comment with or speak to, which exists in all offices, all government probably, on both sides of the aisle, versus the ability to obtain information. And that's why we have the Open Meetings Act and the Open Records Act, is that, particular reporter or journalist or public citizen wants to get information from an office, a state agency, an elected official, and that person doesn't want to talk to them, they don't have to. But when you ask for the email or the document or the report or the record, there should be a way for you to get that information that you're looking for. So that's where it's important in understanding that, get the personality out of the way and give me the hard copy or the soft copy of the piece of information that exists within the government records so that I can find out what's happening. And that's what's so important about making sure that we implement what we're talking about here today.
But if you do end up on a list, where do you go to complain about it once you find out about that? In Lauren's case, she would have to complain to the Attorney General's office, and that is not going to work because that's just not going to be something that is going to be in her favor,
Well, I mean, I think that's an opportunity to shame the public official about doing something so ridiculous. I mean, they need to hear that the public doesn't support that. And I don't think the public would support that. I mean, like you said, I think all elected officials have their favorite reporters and their less favorite reporters, and I'd like to talk to so-and-so, and that's a person I think, but that has nothing whatsoever to do about making lists, to not give public information, or to work extra hard to violate somebody's particular rights and ability to access what they're legally entitled to access. That's just not good.
Well, we could, again, go all day on this, but we are out of time. And I'd like to thank my panel, our panel here, for an excellent presentation. We've got some really great stuff coming up throughout the day. A couple more panels this morning, a great lunch presentation, and then an excellent panel this afternoon. So thanks for coming, and look forward to talking with you all.